The rope cut into her wrists with a dry scrape, raw hemp grinding against soft skin. The girl flinched, but she made no sound, only her dark eyes fixed on Sheriff Kane, watching every movement as though each knot he pulled sealed something larger than her fate. A lantern swung overhead, throwing long, restless shadows across the jailhouse walls. Each sway painted Kane's face, first in gold, then in black, as though the light itself couldn't decide whether he was a savior or an executioner. "Hold still," Kane muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. His hands, broad and weathered from years of riding and gun smoke, moved with mechanical precision. He had bound outlaws, drunks, even killers, but never a child. The Apache girl, no more than 15, maybe 16, sat on the hard bench in silence, her chin lifted as if daring him to finish what he had started. The law said he had to. The town said he must. But the law did not feel the knots tighten. The law did not meet those eyes that seemed older than the desert itself. When the last loop cinched, Kane stepped back, flexing stiff fingers. The room felt suddenly smaller, heavy with the smell of oil lamps, stale whiskey, and the faint metallic tang of blood from an old fight still drying in the corner. Outside, the night wind carried fragments of voices, settlers gathering in the saloon across the street, their anger stoked by a deputy eager for blood. Kane dropped onto his chair, the wood creaking beneath his weight. For a long time, he stared at the silver badge spinning slowly between his fingers. Each turn caught the lantern light until it flashed like lightning, then dulled into shadow. The badge had once been his pride, the proof that a man could stand for order in a land gone to dust and greed. Now it felt more like a shackle than the rope he'd tied around the girl's wrists. When the jailhouse clock struck midnight, the sound cracked the silence like a gunshot. That was when Kane finally bent forward, pressing his forehead against his scarred hands. His shoulders trembled, and though no one would ever admit to hearing it, Sheriff Kane wept. Tras. Hours earlier, the town had been loud with fury. It had started at the general store. The rancher Harlan Finch claimed the Apache girl had stolen bread and a coil of rope. Kane had arrived to find the girl cornered, settlers shouting in English she didn't understand. Her face was smeared with dust, her breathing shallow, yet her gaze burned steady, more pride than fear. She was caught red-handed. Finch spat, jabbing a thick finger toward her. "If you don't lock her up, Kane, you might as well hand this whole town to the savages." Kane had felt every eye on him, weighing his next move. His deputy, Clayton Ward, stood at his side, with that sly grin that never reached his eyes. Ward had been stirring trouble in whispers for months, muttering about raids and stolen cattle, blaming every misfortune on the tribes camped beyond the river. The man enjoyed power the way a coyote enjoyed blood. "The law says theft gets a trial," Kane answered, voice flat. Ward leaned close enough that Kane caught the sour whiskey on his breath. "Law says a trial, sure, but folks here won't wait on a judge. String her up by morning, and you'll have peace. Fail to, and you'll have a war." It was then the girl had spoken for the first time, in careful, accented English. I took nothing. Her words fell into the dust, like pebbles dropped in a dry well, heard but quickly swallowed by the noise of accusation. Kane had seen the bruises on her wrists even then, fresh rope burns, as though someone else had tied her before he arrived. But the mob didn't want details. They wanted a symbol, and Kane, wearing the black hat and the badge that bound him, had no choice but to drag her into the jailhouse under jeers that bit like stones. Now, in the silence of midnight, Kane's mind refused to rest. He saw her face in the shifting lamplight, unreadable, yet somehow unyielding. He heard echoes of his wife's voice, long buried in the grave, whispering that justice meant more than obedience. He rose, restless, and paced the narrow boards of the cell block. Outside, a dog barked, answered by the lonely squeak of a weather vane turning against the wind. Every sound in the night seemed sharper when guilt gnawed at him. The girl stirred on the bench. "Why do you cry, Lawman?" she asked softly. Kane froze. He hadn't realized she was awake, hadn't realized his quiet breakdown had been noticed. He turned slowly, steel-gray eyes catching hers through the bars. "Sleep," he growled, though his voice carried no threat. She tilted her head, hair falling loose over her shoulder. "You tied me, but your hands shake. You wear iron on your chest, but your heart is heavy. Why?" Kane gripped the bars, the cold iron biting into his palms. For a moment he wanted to answer, to tell her about the graves on the hill outside town where his wife and son lay because he had trusted the law to protect them, to confess that every prisoner he chained was another reminder of how he had failed to save his own family. But the words stayed locked in his throat, and silence settled once more. When dawn began to edge faint light through the high windows, Kane was still awake. He sat with his badge in one hand and his Colt in the other, as if unsure which carried more weight. The Apache girl had not slept either. She sat upright, eyes never leaving him. It felt less like a prisoner watching her jailer and more like a judge waiting on a verdict. A heavy knock rattled the door. Deputy Ward's voice came through, sharp and eager. "Sun's up, Sheriff. Town's waiting." Kane closed his fist around the badge. His eyes burned from sleeplessness and something else he refused to name. He stood slowly, the black duster coat falling around him like a shadow, and unlocked the jailhouse door. The morning air cut like a knife. A crowd was already gathering outside, their faces pinched with expectation. They wanted blood to seal their fear, and Kane was the man they trusted, or demanded, to deliver it. Behind him, the girl rose to her feet, chains clinking softly. Her posture was proud, almost regal, despite the bonds. Kane felt a chill crawl through him as he realized the truth. She was not afraid of dying. The only man trembling was himself. And as he stepped onto the boardwalk, the gallows looming against the sunrise, Sheriff Kane knew the tears he had shed in secret would be nothing compared to the storm about to break. The gallows stood like a skeleton at the edge of town, its timber stark against the pale morning sky. A rough rope dangled from the beam, swaying gently in the breeze as if it already smelled blood. Sheriff Kane guided the Apache girl forward, her wrists bound, her bare feet dragging across the dust. The crowd had swelled, ranchers, shopkeepers, wives clutching children, all gathered with eyes sharp as knives. Deputy Clayton Ward waited at the platform steps, arms folded, mouth curled in that permanent smirk. His badge caught the sunlight, gleaming brighter than it deserved. "Took your time, Sheriff," Ward drawled, loud enough for all to hear. "Town's been waiting on justice. We don't coddle thieves out here." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Someone spat. Another shouted, "Hang her and be done." Kane's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. He kept his steel-gray gaze forward, one hand steady on the girl's shoulder as he guided her closer. Each step weighed more than the last. He felt the badge pinned to his chest, burning hotter than the desert sun. The girl didn't stumble. She walked with the posture of a chief's daughter, her chin lifted, eyes steady on the horizon, as if the crowd were nothing more than wind. That unbroken pride stoked the mob's anger further. To them, her silence was defiance. To Kane, it was something else, something that twisted his insides. Ward leaned closer as Kane halted at the base of the steps. "Do it clean, Kane," he whispered, voice thick with malice. "Show 'em you still stand with your own kind. You start going soft on savages, folks might wonder where your loyalties lie." Kane turned his head slowly, his scar catching the light. "Watch your tongue, deputy." His voice was quiet, but it carried the chill of steel drawn from a sheath. Ward only grinned wider. "Law's the law. Don't matter if she's 15 or 50, rope'll fit all the same." The words struck like a hammer blow, and Kane's grip tightened on the girl's arm. 15. He hadn't wanted to put a number to her age, but Ward had, and now the whole town heard it. From the crowd, Harlan Finch stepped forward, his red face glistening with sweat. "Sheriff, you hang her now or you'll answer to us. That girl's kin been raiding our stock, killing our men. Don't matter if she's guilty of this one thing or 10 more we ain't found yet. She's proof you're willing to keep us safe." The word proof echoed in Kane's skull like a bell. That's all they wanted, a body swinging to calm their fear. Proof, not justice. The girl finally spoke, her voice low but clear. "I stole nothing, but he—" She lifted her chin toward Ward. "He killed my brother." The crowd gasped, then erupted in jeers and shouts. Ward barked a laugh that sounded too rehearsed. "Savage lies," he sneered. "Sheriff, you gonna listen to her, or to the folks you swore to protect?" Kane's eyes swept over the townsfolk. Mothers held their children tighter. Men gripped rifle stocks and pitchfork handles. Fear, not fury, burned in their faces. They wanted this girl dead so they could sleep without hearing phantom hoofbeats in the dark. But Kane saw something else, too. Hesitation. A few eyes darted away when the girl mentioned Ward. A seed of doubt planted, small but alive. "Sheriff Kane," Finch pressed, "are you law or not?" The gallows loomed above like judgment itself. Kane's hand hovered near the butt of his Colt, the pearl grip worn smooth by years of desperate decisions. His other hand still rested on the girl's shoulder, feeling the fragile bones beneath the skin, bones that should have been carrying water jugs or weaving blankets, not waiting for a noose. Inside his chest, 2 hearts seemed to beat. One was the lawman's, cold and steady, demanding obedience to rules written by distant men who would never see this girl's eyes. The other was the father's heart, cracked but not dead, screaming that tying up a child for a crime she might not have committed was the act of a coward. Kane lifted his gaze to the gallows. The rope swayed. The wood creaked. For an instant he saw another face there, his boy's, gasping, wide-eyed, as flames consumed their home years ago. His boy had cried out for him then, and Kane had been too far, too late. The weight of that failure had driven him into the badge. But now, staring at the Apache girl, he wondered if the badge was nothing but another mask for cowardice. The townsfolk pressed closer, a living tide of dust and sweat. "Hang her, Sheriff," they cried. "Do your duty." Ward stepped to Kane's side, hand brushing the pistol at his hip. "What's it gonna be?" he asked, almost cheerful. "Law or chaos?" Kane turned slowly, his cold eyes meeting the deputy's. He saw the flicker there, the quick dart of guilt hidden under arrogance. The girl's accusation was true. Ward had blood on his hands. Kane didn't need a confession to know it. He had spent years reading men like cards in a gambler's hand. Ward was guilty, and the girl had seen too much. That was why she'd been dragged here. Not for bread, not for rope, for silence. Kane's hand brushed his own badge. The silver disc spun once between his fingers, catching the morning light, before he pinned it back to his chest. He straightened his shoulders, taller, broader, a man once more instead of a broken mourner. "You want a hanging?" Kane said, his voice cutting through the noise like a rifle crack. "Then you'll damn well have proof before I put a rope round anyone's neck." The crowd faltered, stunned into stillness. Ward's smirk faltered too, twitching at the edges. "She'll stand trial," Kane continued, "like the law demands, and if she's guilty then she swings, but not before." A murmur of discontent rose, angry but uncertain. Ward's hand clenched into a fist. "Trial? Judge won't be here for weeks. You think these people can sleep with a savage under your roof till then? You're gonna start a war, Kane." Kane's voice dropped, gravel scraping steel. Maybe war's already here. The girl looked up at him then, and for the first time her gaze softened, just a flicker, as if she saw the crack in the iron mask of the sheriff. Kane turned away, leading her back toward the jail, every step dragging the weight of the crowd's fury behind him. Ward called after him, his voice high and sharp. "You just chose her over your own people. Don't think this town'll forget it." Kane didn't answer. He felt the eyes of the crowd like bullets in his back. He knew the Gallows would not stand idle for long. They were building one not for the girl, but for him. The sun had barely set when the whispers began to spread. By the time lanterns glowed in windows up and down Main Street, the whole town buzzed with one story. Apache warriors were massing beyond the San Pedro River. Some claimed a dozen riders had been spotted near the ridge. Others swore they'd seen campfires flickering like stars in the hills. Whatever the number, fear grew faster than fact, and by nightfall, fear had become certainty. The girl in Kane's jail had drawn her people, like a magnet draws iron. Kane stood at the barred window of the sheriff's office, the Apache girl sitting silent behind him. Outside, a restless crowd gathered in the square. Their voices rose and fell like the surf of an angry sea, demanding answers. The Gallows loomed at the far end of town, its rope swaying in the night breeze like a threat left unfinished. Deputy Ward leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, chewing on a splinter of wood. His smirk had returned, sharp as a blade. "Told you, Kane, keeping her here was a mistake. They'll come riding in before week's end. Might already be crossing the river tonight." Kane turned, his steel-gray eyes cutting through the shadows. "You sound awful certain." Ward spat into the dirt, never breaking eye contact. "Because I know how they think. You take one of theirs. They come for her. Doesn't matter, she's a thief and a liar. Blood calls to blood. You want this town safe? Rope her up before they torch us all in our beds." The girl lifted her head, chains clinking softly. Her voice, though tired, carried like a stone's, skipping across still water. "They do not come for me. They come for truth." The words prickled across Kane's skin. The crowd outside roared louder, men shouting to arm themselves, women clutching children and looking toward the black line of hills as if enemies already waited there. Kane stepped out onto the boardwalk. The night smelled of dust and sweat, of kerosene lamps burning low. Townsfolk pressed close, their eyes wide, their fear sharpening into anger. "You gonna hand her over, Sheriff?" Harlan Finch called, voice trembling more from nerves than rage. "You said trial, but trial don't stop war. That girl's kin are ridin' for our throats." Kane let the silver badge spin in his fingers, the lantern light flashing across it. The crowd quieted, if only to hear which way his judgment would fall. "I said trial." Kane answered, each word cold and measured, and the law don't bend just because fear tells it to. A murmur swept through them, some relieved, most not. A farmer's wife cried out, "And what of our children? You'll gamble their lives on a savage's word." Before Kane could reply, Ward raised his voice, oily and smooth. "Law don't protect you when your barns are burning. Justice don't matter when you wake to scalps on your porch." He stepped onto the boardwalk beside Kane, his voice carrying like a preacher's sermon. "The sheriff wants a trial. I say we take justice ourselves. String her tonight and let her people see we won't be cowed." The crowd roared approval, stamping feet and waving fists. Kane's hand dropped instinctively to his Colt. For one breathless second, he thought the mob might surge forward, drag the girl out of the cell, and hang her themselves. His thumb brushed the pearl handle, and the old steel whispered its promise. One pull, and silence would follow. Instead, Kane raised his voice above the clamor, gravel rolling like thunder. "You hang her tonight, without proof, and you hang yourselves. Apache come ridin' not 'cause she's guilty, but 'cause you proved you are. Murder breeds murder. That's a rope no town can cut loose from." The words struck like iron on stone. The crowd hesitated, their fury colliding with the truth of his warning. Fear still burned in their faces, but for the moment, they held back. Ward leaned close, voice low enough only Kane could hear. "You bought yourself a night, maybe two. But when they ride in, they'll take you first. Folks will hand you to the Apaches just to save their skins." Kane's jaw tightened. Maybe that's what justice looks like. Ward's grin faltered. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his face. "Idiot stool." Later, alone in the dim jailhouse, Kane poured whiskey into a tin cup. The girl watched him silently, her dark eyes reflecting the lantern flame. "They will come," she said at last. Kane took a long swallow, the burn carving down his throat. "Your people?" She nodded, but not to burn, to speak, to show what he. Her gaze shifted toward the door Ward had left through. "Did to my brother. They know he lies. They know I saw." Kane felt the whiskey turn bitter in his mouth. Betrayal, cover-up, murder. The girl's words fit too neatly into the cracks he already suspected. Ward wasn't just stirring trouble. He was hiding his own crime beneath the mob's fury. Kane set the cup down hard enough to rattle the desk. "Law ain't always justice," he muttered, then louder, almost to himself. "But justice rides with me." The girl tilted her head, studying him with the strange calm of one who had already faced death and found it less frightening than silence. "Then you must choose. Law of rope or justice of truth." By midnight, riders appeared on the far ridge. Lanterns flared, and the town bell clanged wildly. Kane mounted the steps of the boardwalk as armed men gathered, rifles shaking in their hands. Across the black stretch of desert, a line of torches burned like a necklace of fire. Figures on horseback sat motionless, their silhouettes etched against the stars. "Savages!" someone shouted. "They'll charge any minute." Ward pushed through the crowd, pistol in hand. There's your war, Kane. You gonna stand there and let 'em burn us out, or you gonna give 'em what they came for?" Kane narrowed his eyes. The riders across the river did not move. Their torches burned steady. No war cries, no rush of hoofbeats. Just waiting, watching. "They ain't here for fire," Kane said. "They're here for truth." Ward's lip curled. "Truth don't keep a man alive. Neither does a lie," Kane answered, hand resting on his Colt. The town fell into uneasy silence. Across the river, the Apache torches glowed like stars, refusing to fade. The choice pressed down heavy. Hand over the girl and betray justice, or hold her and invite bloodshed. And Sheriff Kane, scarred and weary, knew the moment of reckoning was coming with the dawn. The jailhouse breathed with silence, broken only by the slow creak of the lantern swaying on its hook. Sheriff Kane sat at his desk, the weight of his Colt heavy at his side, the silver badge spinning between his fingers like a coin deciding fate. Outside, the town had grown restless, shadows pacing beneath the saloon lamps, whispers sharp as knives. Beyond the river, the Apache torches still glowed against the midnight hills, a patient reminder that dawn would bring a reckoning. In the cell, the girl shifted, chains clinking against the iron bars. Her eyes followed Kane as though she could read the storm inside him. "You do not sleep," she said softly. Kane didn't look up, never been much for it. "You drink instead." He glanced at the half-empty bottle of whiskey on his desk. "Keeps the ghosts quiet." Her voice carried no judgment. "Your ghosts shout loud." For a long time, he said nothing. Then he stood and moved closer, resting his hand on the bars. "What did you mean, truth, back out there, when you said your people came not for you, but for truth?" The girl raised her chin. In the lantern's glow, Kane saw the bruises at her throat, the dust streaked across her face, and the pride that no rope could choke. "My brother is dead. He did nothing. Your deputy killed him." The words struck like a bullet, lodging deep. Kane felt his jaw tighten, the scar on his neck pulling taut. "Ward?" She nodded. "We were gathering firewood near the ridge. My brother carried no gun, only a bow for rabbits. Your deputy rode upon us. He said we had no right to cut trees there, that all land belonged to settlers now. My brother told him it was our people's ground before his people ever came. Ward laughed, then shot him, close, in the chest, I saw." Her voice did not tremble. If anything, it rang steadier with each word, like iron hammered into shape. Kane's hand curled around the bar until his knuckles whitened. Images flooded his mind. Ward, drunk at the saloon, boasting about keeping the town safe. Ward, always too eager to brand the Apache as thieves and killers. Ward, standing smug by the gallows, urging Kane to string the girl without trial. The puzzle locked into place, ugly and undeniable. "You tell anyone else this?" Kane asked. Her eyes flickered to the badge on his chest. Would they believe an Apache girl over a man with iron on his vest? Kane drew back slowly, the floorboards groaning under his boots. He poured another shot of whiskey, but didn't drink it. He stared into the glass, seeing not liquor but the faces of his wife and son, murdered years ago by men who had hidden behind the law. His hand shook. The girl spoke again, quieter now. "Ward does not want a trial, because I would speak, because the truth would hang him instead." The words hit harder than the whiskey ever could. Kane set the glass down with a sharp crack, liquid sloshing over his hand. For the first time in years, the badge on his chest felt less like silver and more like lead. The door slammed open. Deputy Ward strode in, swagger thick as smoke. His eyes glittered with the reflection of the lantern. "You keepin' her comfortable, Sheriff?" he sneered. "Town's ready. Apache are waitin' out there like wolves, and you're coddlin' their pup. Folks are losing patience." Kane's hand hovered near his Colt, but he didn't draw. "Not yet. You in a hurry to hang her, Clayton?" Ward grinned. "Quicker it's done. Quicker her kin ride back to the hills. You drag your feet, and they'll burn us out before week's end." He turned, glaring at the girl through the bars. "Best thing you can do for your people, little squaw, is swing quiet and save 'em the trouble." The girl did not flinch. She only said, clear and strong, "Murderer." Ward spun back, face reddening. "What did you say?" "She says you killed her brother," Kane answered, voice low and dangerous. Ward froze, then barked out a laugh. "Savage lies. You believe that, Kane? After all the raids, all the blood they've spilled?" Kane's eyes cut into him. "You were riding the ridge last month. Folks said you came back with blood on your boots. Never explained whose it was." Ward's grin faltered. "You callin' me a killer, Sheriff? I'm callin' you a man with too much to lose if she lives long enough to speak in front of a judge." Kane's hand dropped to his Colt. The room thickened, air heavy as thunder before the strike. Ward's hand twitched toward his own pistol. His eyes narrowed. "Careful, Kane. You point that iron at me, this town won't side with you. They'll bury you right next to her." The standoff stretched like a noose drawn tight. The lantern swayed, shadows sliding across their faces. Two lawmen, one carved from silence, the other from lies. The girl's breathing filled the silence, steady as drumbeat. Finally, Ward eased his hand away from his gun and forced a chuckle. "Ain't worth fightin' over a thief. I'll see you at sunup, Sheriff. By then, this town'll have decided which of us they trust." He pushed the door open and stepped into the night, leaving the room colder than before. Kane exhaled slowly, the tension bleeding from his body. He returned to the desk, sat heavily, and buried his face in his scarred hands. The girl watched him without pity. "You believe me now," she said. Kane raised his head. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, were burning. "I believed you the moment he smiled. A guilty man always smiles too wide." She leaned forward against the bars. "Then you must choose, Sheriff. Tie me tighter and let me hang, or cut the rope and face him." The weight of her words pressed down like the desert night. Kane's scar itched, the phantom burn of old wounds. He thought of his boy, hanged in his nightmares each time he closed his eyes. He thought of his wife's voice, whispering that law without justice was nothing but another kind of crime. He stood, drawing his Colt, not to fire but to check the chamber. 6 bullets, cold and certain. He slid it back into the holster, then picked up his badge from the desk. For a long moment, he stared at the star-shaped piece of silver. Then he spun it once more and whispered, "Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me." The girl's eyes shone, reflecting both lantern light and something older, deeper, hope. Outside, the Apache torches burned brighter on the horizon, steady as judgment. Inside, Sheriff Kane felt the walls closing in. The law demanded obedience. Justice demanded blood. And come dawn, only one of them would still be standing. The dawn came thin and gray, bleeding slow light over the roofs of Dry Creek. Sheriff Kane stood at the jailhouse window, watching the horizon catch fire in streaks of red. A bad omen, some would say. The sky painted with the promise of blood. Inside the cell, the Apache girl sat upright, her wrists still bound, her dark eyes steady. She had not slept. Neither had Kane. He wore the night like a cloak, shoulders heavy, jaw locked, eyes ringed with exhaustion. On the desk lay two objects, his silver badge and a length of rope. One gleamed, the other waited. The church bell struck 6. Outside, the crowd stirred to life. Boots clattered, doors slammed, voices carried through the cool air. They were gathering at the gallows again. This time, there would be no patience, no delay. Deputy Ward arrived first, swaggering up the boardwalk with his pistol riding low on his hip. His grin carried the confidence of a man who knew the mob stood behind him. "Mornin', Sheriff," he called, voice bright as broken glass. "Town's ready for its justice. You best deliver before someone decides you're the one belongs in that rope." Kane turned slowly, steel-gray eyes cutting through Ward like a blade. "You eager to see her hang because you're scared of what she might say?" Ward's grin faltered, but only for a heartbeat. "Careful, Kane. Speak too loud, and folks'll think you've switched sides. They'll brand you an Apache sympathizer, and you know what happens to men who betray their own." Kane stepped closer, boots heavy on the worn planks. His voice dropped low, rough as gravel. "I buried my wife and son, 'cause men like you hid behind the law. You don't scare me, Clayton. You disgust me." The girl's chains rattled as she stood, her voice cutting through the thick air. "He killed my brother, I saw." Ward slammed a fist against the bars, rattling them so hard the lantern swayed. "Shut your mouth, squaw." Kane moved between them, hand resting on his Colt. The moment stretched, tight as a drawn bow. For one flicker of time, Kane wondered if Ward would draw right then and there. But Ward smirked again, stepping back, letting the tension bleed into silence. "Bring her," he ordered. "Crowd won't wait, and neither will I." The gallows loomed against the pale sky, like a cross carved from shadow. 100 townsfolk pressed close, their faces a storm of fear, anger, and something else, expectation. Mothers held children, ranchers clutched rifles, and the saloon-keeper passed a bottle through trembling hands. All eyes locked on Sheriff Kane as he led the girl forward, the sound of her chains ringing in the morning stillness. Ward strutted up the steps, addressing the crowd with a showman's flair. "People of Dry Creek, a justice comes today. A thief, a liar, a savage murderer stands before you. The sheriff will do his duty, or we will." The crowd roared, stomping boots and pounding fists on the wood rails. The girl stood tall despite her bonds, her face calm, almost regal, as if daring them all to look her in the eye before they condemned her. Kane climbed the steps slowly, every footfall echoing like thunder in his bones. He reached the platform, the noose swaying gently at eye level. The memory of his boy's scream tore through him. The fire, the choking smoke, the sound of a rope creaking in his nightmares. He clenched his jaw until the scar on his neck throbbed. Ward thrust the rope toward him. "Do it, Sheriff. Prove you're still one of us, or lay down that badge and let someone else take it." The crowd fell into an expectant hush. The only sound was the wind rattling the noose against the beam. Kane stared at the rope, then at the silver badge pinned to his chest. Law or justice? Badge or truth? Two paths, both ending in blood. He pulled the badge free. For a long, breathless moment, he held it in his hand, its edges cutting into his calloused palm. Then he raised it high for the crowd to see. "This star stands for law," he growled, his voice carrying over the gathered. "But law without justice is nothing but another kind of crime." He hurled the badge to the ground. It struck the platform with a sharp clang that rang louder than the bell in the church steeple. Gasps tore through the crowd. Ward's face twisted, shock giving way to rage. "You just signed your death warrant, Kane," the deputy hissed. Kane drew his Colt in a single smooth motion, the barrel gleaming in the morning light. The crowd flinched back as his voice thundered. "This girl don't swing. Not by my hand, not by yours. She'll stand before a judge, and if any man here thinks he can stop that, he'll answer to me." The square froze, caught between terror and awe. The girl's eyes shone, though she made no sound. Ward laughed, high and ugly. "You just turned your gun on your own people. Look at him, folks. The sheriff's with them now. Apache lover, traitor." Shouts erupted. Some screamed for Kane's blood. Others hesitated, their fury tangled with doubt. For the first time, the town looked less like a mob and more like a crowd divided. Then came another sound, the distant thunder of hooves. All heads turned. Across the river, the Apache riders moved closer, their torches flickering like stars swallowed by daylight. A war party, riding slow, steady, unafraid. "They're comin'," someone cried. Panic rippled through the townsfolk. Mothers dragged children back. Men fumbled with rifles, fear choking reason. Ward raised his pistol high, voice shrill with desperation. "Kill her now, before they storm us." But Kane moved faster. He slammed his Colt's barrel against Ward's pistol, knocking it aside. The gun discharged, the shot cracking the sky. Horses screamed, townsfolk scattered, chaos tearing the square apart. Kane pressed his Colt to Ward's chest. His eyes burned like coals in the wind. "One more lie, Clayton, and you'll answer to the rope you built." The crowd stilled again, torn between fury and the cold certainty in Kane's voice. The Apache riders drew nearer, their faces painted, their silence more terrifying than war cries. Ward sneered, sweat dripping down his temple. "You can't fight them and us both, Kane. You'll die standing with her." Kane's jaw tightened. "Then I die with justice, not with cowards." He yanked the noose from its beam and tossed it into the dust below. The symbol of law was broken. The choice was made. Wind pushed the smell of river silt across Dry Creek as the Apache riders reached the far bank and fanned into a crescent of stillness. Their ponies stamped and snorted, breath pluming in thin ghosts. Painted faces watched the town without a word. On this side of the water, rifles chattered with nervous hands. A baby cried. Somewhere a church door banged like a shot. Sheriff Kane stood on the Gallows platform with the Apache girl at his shoulder, her wrists still roped, iron biting skin. The noose he'd torn down lay in the dust below like a dead snake. Deputy Clayton Ward paced the edge of the crowd, coat flared, pistol loose in his fist, voice sharp as broken glass. "Form a line!" Ward barked. "You, Finch, get your boys on the barrels. If they cross, you fire. Sheriff's done lost his nerve, so the town'll do its own hangin'." Kane said nothing. He scanned faces, not for courage, but for the split second before panic becomes murder. He saw it there, the white corners of mouths, beads of sweat, the way men held their guns too high, a powder spark, and the world would burn. The girl lifted her chin toward the river. "My father comes," she said, voice low and steady. "He will speak before any blood." Ward heard and laughed. "Your father can speak to St. Peter." He mounted the steps 2 at a time and shouldered past Kane, grabbing the girl's bound wrist. "We're done waitin'." Kane's hand landed on Ward's forearm like a trap. "Take your hand off her." A hush rippled through the square, sound falling away until the creak of the gallows beam was the only thing alive. Ward's eyes glittered. He leaned close enough for Kane to smell last night's whiskey. "You ain't sheriff anymore," he hissed. "You tossed your star with the rope. Step aside or I'll—" Kane's Colt rose, as if it had been waiting in the air. The pearl grip rested under his scarred thumb as if made to fit grief. "I don't need a star to stop a coward." Ward's smile collapsed to a thin line. For 3 heartbeats, the town hung there, balanced on the edge of a blade. Then hooves splashed. A single Apache rider crossed the shallows, water flashing around his horse's legs. He held no lance raised for charge, no rifle to his shoulder, only a white strip of cloth tied to his bridle, and a small bundle wrapped in deerskin under one arm. He rode until he stood in the thin margin between river and town, where mud forgot which side it belonged to. "Hold your fire," Kane called, voice like iron striking iron. "He's come to talk." Ward barked a laugh. "He's come to scout targets." He pivoted, lifting his pistol toward the rider. Kane stepped between gun and man, the Colt's muzzle touching Ward's sternum. "You pull," Kane said quietly, "and I end it here." Ward's nostrils flared. "You reckon the crowd'll let you walk after you shoot me?" "Don't aim to walk." Kane didn't blink. The Apache rider swung down, moving with the grave calm of a man stepping into sacred ground. He untied the bundle, lifted something small and bright, and held it high. Sun-touched metal, a spur rowel, blood-browned leather still attached, the brass face, nicked in a way every ranch hand in Dry Creek recognized. 3 notches like teeth. Harlan Finch cursed under his breath. "That's Ward's spur." Murmurs spread like wind through grass. Eyes shifted, shoulders loosened, then tensed again as if realization were just another weapon. Ward's laugh came back, high, wrong. Could have been stolen. He jabbed his pistol toward the rider, or planted. Savages lie. The Apache rider spoke in careful English, each word set down like a stone. "We found it by the oak at Red Ridge, beside my son's blood." A second figure guided a horse from the river, an older man, hair braided with a single eagle feather, face carved in wind and time. He wore no war paint, only that feather and a gaze that made the gallows look like a child's toy. The girl drew a soft breath. "Father." The chief stopped 10 paces short of the steps and addressed Kane, not Ward. "Lawman," he said, voice deep as canyon shade. "Your man killed my son, my daughter saw. We come not for war, we come for the truth." Kane felt the words as much as heard them. He turned, and there it was at last, the crack in the mob, the tiny light, men shifting, doubt gathering like rain on a dry field. Ward saw it too, and panicked. He shoved the girl ahead of him, jammed steel against her temple. The crowd cried out. The chief's horse stamped, and the Apache line across the river drew taut, hands sliding to bow and rifle. "Back away," Ward yelled, voice breaking. "All of you, Sheriff, drop that gun, or I paint the boards with her brains." Kane's heart thudded once, hard enough to ring in his ears. A child's weight in Ward's gun hand, a war in the other. Ropes and badges and graves. The choice he'd been running from his whole life stood in front of him, wearing Ward's grin, and his wife's ghost. He set his jaw. "Clayton," he said, softer than the wind but carrying to every corner of the square. "Law says a trial. Justice says a reckoning. I'll give you one of 'em." Ward sneered. "You'll give me nothing but—" Kane moved. His left hand knocked Ward's wrist aside. The pistol barked, powder scorch biting Kane's cheek. Wood splintered. The girl ducked, eyes flashing. In the same breath, Kane's Colt roared. The sound smashed the morning flat. Ward staggered as if the earth had tilted, surprise tearing his mouth open. Blood bloomed dark across his vest. He fired again, wild. A window shattered. Women screamed. Kane put his second shot through Ward's gun hand. The deputy's pistol spun from blood-slick fingers and clattered against the rail. Ward dropped to his knees, breath coming in broken whistles. He stared up at Kane with the fury of a snake that's already dead and doesn't know it. "Traitor," he whispered, red sliding from the corner of his mouth. "You die for this." "Maybe," Kane said, "but not today." Ward lunged. Kane's third shot hammered him backward. The deputy slammed the post and slid down until his badge hung level with his belt buckle, then lower. Silence swallowed the square, except for the crackle of a torn banner and the soft clink of the girl's rope against the platform. A door slammed somewhere. A baby hiccuped. The town exhaled in one ragged breath. Then rifles jerked up again, as if the men had only traded one target for another. "Sheriff killed his own deputy," someone shouted. "He's gone. Outlaw." "Stand down," Kane ordered, voice raw. He holstered the Colt with deliberate calm and reached for his knife. The crowd flinched as steel flashed, but he only cut the rope from the girl's wrists. The hemp fell away, leaving raw bands of angry skin. He took her hands gently, palm to palm, like a man checking a foal's legs. "You're free." She flexed, winced, then lifted her chin. For an instant, something warm broke through the stoic iron of her face. He cannot hurt anyone now. Kane turned to the chief, and in front of the town, opened his hands. "She goes with you. No man touches her again under color of my law." The chief's gaze held him. "And you, Lawman, who protects you now?" Kane looked at the body at his feet, the smashed glass, the crowd's eyes turning mean again as shock curdled into fear, into blame. Beyond them, the Apache riders waited, silent as stone. Between river and gallows, he stood alone with a smoking gun and no star. "No one," he said. "Maybe that's how it ought to be." A rancher shouldered forward, face red, rifle trembling. "He killed a sworn officer," he shouted. "String him." Another voice rose, cracked with age. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house, hands clenched white around her shawl. "Deputy Briggs took my niece's wage and called it justice," she cried. "And Ward told her to be grateful for his mercy. I say the sheriff did right." A handful of women murmured agreement. A few men swore, boots scraped. The square became two tides slamming into each other with Kane as the rock that split them. Across the river, bows lifted, rifles cocked. On the boardwalk, settlers matched them, hammers drawn back with audible clicks that iced the blood. Finch's foreman spat. "You give that girl back, and they'll hit us anyway. It's how they are." The chief's eyes never left Kane. If we wanted war, the sun would rise on ashes. He raised the spur rowel, let it catch light. "We want the one who did this. He is paid." "He's paid," Kane said, and nudged Ward's pistol away with his boot. But a man doesn't bleed alone when crowds are thirsty. Something in the wind shifted, hotter, brittle. A boy tripped in the dust, and a rifle went off in reflex, the shot cracking sky. Echo answered from the riverbank, 2-3 reports that might have been warning or the start of hell. Horses screamed, women ducked, men wheeled, barrels swinging. Kane stepped in front of the girl and threw his arms wide, coat flaring like a black flag. "Hold your fire!" For one fevered heartbeat, everything held, smoke hanging, eyes wide, fingers white on triggers, the chief's hand open in the air, the girl at Kane's back, breathing like a sparrow trapped in a storm. Then he heard it, the rattle and clank from behind, from the jail road, wheels, harness, men shouting in cadence not born of Dry Creek. A dust plume rose beyond the church. A column of riders thundered into view in neat pairs, federal blue coats flashing brass. At their head, a hard-faced marshal lifted a hand and bellowed, "In the name of the territory, drop your weapons." Every gun in the square turned a different direction at once. Kane did not move. He stood between river and rope, starless, with a dead deputy at his feet and 100 muzzles aimed past him and at him. The wind caught the fallen noose and made it twitch like something that wanted back on the beam. For a breathless moment, nothing moved. Then the territorial column fanned across the street, blue coats bristling with carbines. Brass flashed, leather creaked. At their head, a hard-eyed man with a gray stubble reined up beneath the church eaves. "I'm Marshal Hollis Pike," he called, voice flat as a ledger. "By order of the territory, lay down your arms." No one did. Settlers had muzzles fixed on the river. Apache riders, still as carved obsidian, had muzzles fixed on the town. Between them stood Sheriff Kane, without a star, a dead deputy at his boots, the girl behind his coat, and a noose twitching on the boards, like a thing that refused to die. Kane lifted an open hand. "Marshal," he said, never taking his eyes from the crowd. "You pull one trigger, and all of 'em pull. You see it, same as I do." Pike's gaze flicked over the scene. The body, the scorched powder mark across Kane's cheek, the girl's abraded wrists. The lawman's mind moved like a watch spring. "Who shot first?" "Ward," Kane said. "He put iron to a child's head. I stopped him." Finch snarled. "He murdered a sworn officer." The Apache chief eased his horse forward until riverlight silvered the feather in his hair. He held up the spur rowel. Sun caught it and threw a blade of gold across the square. "This was at Red Ridge," he said evenly, "by my son's blood." Pike's jaw ticked. "That's Deputy Ward's mark." Murmurs swelled. A woman's voice broke through. "Mrs. Henderson," knuckles white on her shawl. "The deputy was a bully, Marshal. The sheriff did right." Other voices followed, uncertain, overlapping, pulling at the threads of certainty until the mob's fabric loosened. Some cursed. Some sagged with relief they hadn't earned. Pike raised a gloved palm. "Enough." His men steadied. The square breathed again. Kane spoke into that thin space. "Marshal, there's only one way no one dies. The girl goes free to her father. You take Ward's body and my statement, hold an inquest, dig as deep as you please. But she doesn't swing for a lie." A rifle clicked behind the crowd. "Traitor talk." Pike didn't look away from Kane. "And you, Sheriff?" Kane glanced at the broken noose at his empty breast where a star had shone. "I'll answer for my part." He unbuckled his gun belt and let it drop. The Colt hit wood with a dull, tired sound. Then he took the same rope that had chewed the girl's wrists and looped it around his own, knotting it there with a steady hand. A hiss rippled through the square, shock at the sight of a man binding himself. The girl stepped close. "Do not," she whispered. "They will take you and call it law." Kane's voice gentled. "Law ain't a place, little one. It's a choice a man makes when nobody's watching but his own ghosts." He tipped his head toward the river. "Go." The chief slid from the saddle and met Kane at the edge of the platform. Wind-teased gray hair loose from his braid. "You take the wound meant for us," he said. "I take the one I earned," Kane answered. "See her home." They regarded each other for a heartbeat, two men who'd buried sons and made hard bargains with the world. Then the chief touched Kane's forearm, brief, grave, and turned. He swung the girl up behind a young rider and signaled his line. Horses moved as one. Not a whoop, not a cry. Only the whisper of water and leather as the Apache withdrew without showing spine or back. Guns wavered in settler hands, some falling, some following the riders with the hungry eyes of men who needed an enemy to make their fear make sense. Pike's men interposed, carbines held low but ready. "Hold," Pike snapped, and Dry Creek obeyed the voice it wasn't sure it wanted. The chief paused midstream and lifted the spur one last time. "You have your murderer," he said to the town. "Do with him what you do. We keep our truth." Then they were across, torchlight a necklace of ember that dwindled along the far bank. Silence sat down heavy. Somewhere a horse blew. Kane felt the rope fibers grind his skin and thought of tiny wrists under the same bite. He raised bound hands to Pike. "Well?" Pike dismounted. The marshal's eyes were older up close, threaded with the kind of road dust that doesn't wash out. He looked to the gallows, to Ward's blood pooling black in the cracks, to the faces in the street, half grateful, half vengeful, all exhausted. "Sheriff," Pike said, and the title sounded like a memory. "You just prevented a war and started a different one." "Reckon that's about the size," Kane said. Pike cut the rope with his own knife. Hemp fell away. "You'll ride with me to Santa Fe. There'll be questions. Some will come from men who don't care for answers." A murmur rose. "No. Yes. Hang him." Half the town tugging one way, half the other, the whole like a team about to break its own neck in the traces. Finch pointed. "He don't leave this town alive." Pike's stare snapped to the rancher. "You try to stop a federal officer in the execution of his duty. I'll fill a wagon with cuffs before sundown." Something in his tone made even the bold men swallow. Pike bent, stripped Ward's badge, and dropped it into a canvas satchel with the spur. "Evidence," he said. Kane picked up his own fallen star from the planks. It was scratched, gritty with dust. He held it until the edges cut his palm. Across the square, a boy watched him with wide, wet eyes, a boy who would remember this hour longer than any sermon. Kane closed his fingers around the badge, then walked to the abandoned courthouse, the sun-bleached ruin whose windows were blank, like blinded eyes. He set the star on the sill where the judge had once banged a gavel, and left it there for the wind to turn. "Law belongs to the house built for it," he said, mostly to himself. Pike gathered his reins. "Mount up." Kane nodded and didn't. He looked past Pike to the river, to the line of cottonwoods that saw all, to the low hills that kept secrets for those who needed them kept. He looked to the graves on the ridge where the wind trimmed grass like a careful barber around two small stones. "Marshal," he said, "you'll get what you need from me, one way or another. But if I stay standing in this street any longer, people will die for the show. You know it. I know it." Pike's mouth tugged. A man who had once chosen between paper law and bone-deep justice recognized the same storm in another's eyes. He raised his voice for the town. "By my authority, Sheriff Kane is remanded to my custody pending inquest. He will present himself at Fort Lowell within 10 days. Finch lurched forward. "He'll run." Pike didn't blink. "Then I'll hunt him, but today I'll not feed your gallows." The words were a bridge built in midair. Maybe it would hold, maybe it wouldn't. But in that thin grace, guns lowered, curses died, and breath came again. Kane stepped down from the gallows and took his reins from the hitch. He swung into the saddle with the slow care of a man laying a friend in the ground. He touched 2 fingers to the brim of his black hat to Pike. "I'll be there," he said. "You'd best," the marshal answered, too soft for anyone else to hear. Then louder, "Clear the street." Kane turned his horse toward the eastern road. Hooves clopped on weathered boards and then found the familiar give of dust. He didn't look back when the first house fell behind, or the second, or when the gallows shadow broke across him and was gone. He didn't look back when a woman sobbed his name like a prayer, or when a man spat it like a curse. He rode until the town became a smear in heat shimmer, and the river sang low and secret at his left. Only then, with cottonwood shade cooling his face, and cicadas rasping their dull sermon, did Kane's jaw loosen. He pulled his hat brim low, breathed once, and the breathing broke. The sound that left him wasn't much. Not the storm a crowd heard in a saloon, just the hard, private crack of a man's heart, finding a seam it couldn't close. Tears ran into the dust on his cheeks and left no track. Night found him on the ridge above the graves. Stars hammered the sky into cold nails. He knelt between the small stones, set his palm on one, then the other, and let the quiet tell him what he already knew. He had chosen the girl and the truth and the rope for himself. He had chosen to be a man without a star because the star had chosen wrong. Wind combed the grass. A coyote yipped far off, answered by another, and then they were quiet, too. Kane sat back on his heels and looked east, toward a fort he would ride to or not, toward a morning that would judge him either way. When he rose at last, the badge was not on his chest. It turned slowly in courthouse shadow, miles behind him, catching moonlight, flashing, darkening, as if the law itself couldn't decide which side of him it belonged to. He swung into the saddle and headed out under a sky so full of stars it looked like it might split. He rode not fast and not slow, just the pace a man keeps when he knows every mile is both penance and promise. He didn't speak. The horse didn't ask. By the time the sun rimmed the world, Sheriff Kane was a thin figure in the going gold, and Dry Creek was only a memory learning how to ache. Dawn was always the truest judge. Under that thin light, badges and gallows looked like what they were, tools, not answers. Kane had given the town what it asked for once, a man to stand in the doorway and promise order. It had taken him too long to learn that order without truth is just a quieter kind of violence. He had tied a girl because the law said so, then cut her free because his dead knew better. He had faced a man with a badge and found the rot behind it. He had looked a marshal in the eye and asked for a kind of mercy that doesn't live in books. In the end, he had ridden out alone because the price of choosing justice over law is often solitude. There would be those who called him traitor and those who called him savior. Both would be wrong. Sheriff Kane was a man with a scar where a star used to sit. He would ride to Fort Lowell, or he wouldn't, and either way he would carry the same question as a stone in his pocket. When the law fails the weak, what oath remains? He touched the Colt, then the empty place on his chest. Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me.